Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the A to B podcast, your number one source for military entrepreneurship and entertainment. Today, I am not joined by my co-host, Barry Bull. But as always, make sure that you guys like, subscribe, and follow in all of our social media channels, because today we have a very special podcast. And the reason for it is because he is the first author that we interview in our podcast. And who am I talking about? I'm talking about Patrick Holmes. Patrick Holmes. He is a Marine Corps veteran, retired of 20 years, major, by the way. And he is also an author of a book that is actually just coming out this week. You guys will probably see it, a couple of weeks from now, but we're going to be talking about it. Patrick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. One correction, HOLCOMB. Patrick HOLCOMB.
HOLCOMB. Okay, HOLCOMB. What did I say? Did I mess it up? Holmes? It's the Mexican in me. I live in California, guys. I apologize. Patrick Holcomb.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Patrick, first of all, thank you for being here with us today. I do have to ask, what brings you onto the podcast today?
Well, I think it was Jose, actually.
Okay. Jose is the guy behind the scenes. He's the one that makes everything happen.
We had the pleasure of working together a few years back, and we've stayed in touch. And he let me know he was doing this. He knew that I had a book coming out and that I wanted to get out there and spread the word and talk about it. So the stars aligned, and here I am.
Hell yeah! So we definitely appreciate you coming here. I do want to talk about before we get into the book.
Yes.
Which the name of the book is Where the Seams Meet.
Where the Seams Meet. Yeah.
Okay, and it's coming out this Friday.
Mm-hmm. March 29th.
March 29th. And where is it coming out at?
Pretty much anywhere you want to buy books. The easiest place to get it is always Amazon, but Barnes & Noble and all the other online retailers as well. It's going to be in some brick and mortar stores also, but easiest place to find it, Amazon.
Yeah, and that's something that I really want to talk about with you, because I know that there's a lot of people, specifically a lot of military service members, that would like to spread the word, but won't even know how to start to even get published. Because it's one thing to write a book, the other thing is to get published.
Totally. Yeah.
So you obviously accomplished both. So congratulations on that. But I guess one of the first questions that I have for you, Patrick, is who are you? Where you come from?
Ooh, that's a deep question. So where do I come from? Originally from the San Francisco Bay Area. So I was born in a place called Pleasant Hill, and that was there in the Bay. I lived there for the first couple of years of my life, and then I moved around a good deal for the first 10 years. My dad worked for an insurance company called AAA. So every time he got promoted, that meant a move for the family. So it was every 2 or 3 years we were on the move, and we did that till I was about 10, and then ended up in Santa Rosa, which is just about an hour north of San Francisco. Just up the 101. And I was there from 4th grade all the way through high school graduation. And then after high school, it was off to the Marine Corps.
Okay, but you say you're off to the Marine Corps.
Off to the Marine Corps. Yeah.
But the problem is you're an officer, so you have to go to college.
I was enlisted first.
So you're a Mustang.
I'm a Mustang.
Okay, cool. Hey, he's my type of officer. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, so can you explain to the people what a Mustang is, for the ones that
for those who don't know, a Mustang is a Marine who came in enlisted and then made the transition to what some call the dark side, to the officer community. And yes, I did it. Okay.
So essentially you joined as a PFC or Lance Corporal?
Private.
As a private. Okay. Yep. So you joined straight out of high school.
Straight out of high school.
How was that interaction with your recruiter?
You were a recruiter, right?
Yeah, I was a recruiter. Okay. That's why I asked.
You're going to like this. Okay. So the recruiter who initially contacted me was not the one who eventually got me, because there were years in between. This guy, and I don't even know his name, but this guy played the long game, right?
Okay.
So I'm 15, maybe 16 years old, working the drive-through at Wendy's. That was my first job.
Okay.
And I'm handing burgers and fries out that window, and I hand a burger and some fries to some guy who's driving a white sedan wearing a uniform I know nothing about. What does he hand me back? A business card.
Of course he does.
So he chatted me up for a few minutes, and that dude kept coming around. I mean, he knew I wasn't even near graduation, but, I guess he just liked the burgers, whatever. But he kept coming back and chatting me up, and that business card that he gave me, I held on to it. It went on my dresser at home, and it just sat there for a couple years. And I had no intention of joining the military. It wasn't even really on my radar, but for some reason, I kept that card. And then as I started getting closer to high school graduation and thinking about what comes next, talking to other people that were already considering going into the military, I picked up the card, I looked at it, I saw the phone number on there, I gave it a call. The guy who had talked to me initially was long gone by then, but of course somebody else was sitting in that desk ready to answer the phone. We talked. I was in the station the next day, and man, it went quick from there.
Wow. And what year was this?
2000. It was 2000 when I went into the delayed entry program, 2001 when I graduated high school, and then went to boot camp in July.
So the Twin Towers.
Yeah, you're doing the mental math, right?
9/11 happened when you were in boot camp.
Yeah.
How was that?
Range week. Yeah, we were on the range, and there was a buzz. Like, everybody knew something was going on, but nobody really knew what, because when you're a recruit, they don't tell you anything. But eventually pulled us all off the line, got us into the bleachers, told us the basics of what had happened. And at that point, they didn't really know. They knew a plane had crashed into one of the towers, I think, at that point. And, you know, it evolved quickly, but our understanding of the situation as recruits did not evolve quickly. We were talked to maybe a couple times by drill instructors, but the main source of news that we had were newspapers that we were allowed to read 1 day per week on Sunday. You know, so that's how we got our news. A few weeks later, we started getting letters from family members, and they would send clippings or, you know, little piece of news here and there. We would talk amongst ourselves, but our family really had more questions for us that we, of course, couldn't answer.
Yeah, of course, because now that's a direct attack into the United States. So
what does that mean?
Wartime.
Yeah.
Wartime is coming. That's essentially what and you know, you joined during peacetime. You had no idea that this was going to happen. And then there you are, recruit HOLCOMB.
Yep.
About to be private HOLCOMB, about to go to war. Okay. So you graduated. What was your MOS when you were enlisted?
Admin.
Okay. So you were 0111?
Yep. 0121 at the time.
0121, because that changed, right?
That changed.
Yeah, that changed. Okay. So you were 0121 at the time. How would you describe your first enlistment in the Marine Corps?
So many different adjectives. For the MOS itself, I wasn't a huge fan.
Okay.
Yeah, like you envision doing Marine things, and at first I wasn't doing what I would consider Marine things. I was doing a lot of administrative things. It turned out to be a blessing, because a lot of the skills that I developed during those first 2 years were skills that really helped me initially as an officer, because I already had, you know, strong administrative skills that most of my peers wouldn't be able to develop for the next 2 or 3 years after that.
Yeah.
But it was kind of boring, and it's a thankless job too. Nobody really appreciates when the administrators are doing the job well, but as soon as things go bad, then you're the scapegoat. You know, it's kind of like COM, you know?
Yes.
COM is a thankless job as well.
COM, Motor T, Admin.
Yeah, there you go.
I would say those three.
Yeah.
Those three are probably among the two, because when you need to get somewhere, you look at the Motor T guys like, oh, well, all the vehicles are deadline, so what are we going to do? And then admin is like, well, my pay's fucked up. Like,
there you go.
know?
Yeah.
So, and COM too, it's like, oh, I need to talk to that guy that's over that mountain. All this other, it's like, oh, yeah, well, comms are down. Okay. My question to you is, during that first enlistment that you did in the Marine Corps, where were you stationed at?
Miramar.
Oh, okay. So you were stationed.
Did you know that? Yeah, that was me going full circle. Started at Miramar, ended at Miramar.
Oh, okay. So you retired out of Miramar as well.
Yeah, a lot of stops in between, but full circle.
Okay. Now, well, obviously, right, you went to Miramar, that first enlistment, but then now we're talking, things are gearing up in order for you to, you know, do the invasions and all that stuff. So did you partake in that? Did your unit actually get to go?
Yeah, so I actually volunteered for that one. And there were a few spots available for 01s, for admin guys, to deploy with USS Boxer. So it was under MAG 16, and MAG 16 had a couple squadrons that went out as part of this. So we were on the Boxer, but it was part of a group of ships that went out, and it was designated Amphibious Task Force West. That was the designation. So I think we left right before the new year. Yeah, I think it was right before the New Year, just after Christmas, soon before my 20th birthday. So loaded up on the ship and off we went. And it was pretty uncertain at that point what was going to happen. You know, it had all the makings of an invasion, but it had not been declared. So one could say that it was just a show of force. Of course, you know, history proves that that was not the case.
Yeah.
But we sailed out there, and I had the opportunity to leave the ship early as part of a very small advance party. I think there were about 5 of us that went to an airfield, an airstrip really, called Jaliba. And we were responsible for scouting it out and then establishing Mag 16's foothold there. And then that team, we supervised the building of the camp. So within the next 2 weeks, thousands of people filed in, and we established a whole camp and started running aviation operations out of there.
Now, how many deployments that you did while you were in?
2 total. One when I was enlisted, that one during the invasion, and then one as an officer years later to Afghanistan.
How would you compare the difference? And I'm not talking about living conditions. I'm talking about from personal experience. When I lab moved into well, I was artillery first, then I lab moved into a different.
Oh, you were artillery. Okay.
Yeah, so I was artillery first, and then the deployments back then, they were very different from what they are nowadays. Back then, your whole unit, if not your whole battalion, would deploy.
Yeah.
Now it's more of augments. You know, if you're good enough, you're gonna be able to go to this task force, organized task force, SPMACTAF, you know, or whatever. Can you give us some, you know, based on your experience, can you give us some contrast on how deployments were in the early 2000s to how deployments are now?
Well, I think the change that you highlighted there is a good one. When I went the first time, I was so young and so young in the Marine Corps that my focus was really just on my job, and then a little bit outside of that, you know, but I didn't have a great understanding of the larger context. You know, I sat in on a lot of the briefings, and I picked up what I could, but I just didn't have the frame of reference yet to really understand what it all meant. You know, fast forward to 2011, and I was with an artillery battalion. So I was a logistics officer. I was the S4 Alpha and the maintenance management officer for 1st Battalion, 12th Marines out of Hawaii.
Okay.
Right. So we did our whole workup, you know, including ITX out of 29 Palms, and then deployed to Afghanistan. And we were doing distributed ops. So my headquarters battery was at Fiddler's Green, and I was there in the Helmand province. And then all of our firing batteries were distributed elsewhere. And yeah, it was very different because I had years under my belt at that point.
Yeah.
You know, I'd been around for a while. I understood more about the Marine Corps, about how we fought as a corps, but also part of a joint force. And yeah, it was very different because I understood the context and where we
so
things.
You know, you bring in a very good point. And that is because the same thing happened to me too when I was in artillery. I was in the middle of fucking nowhere, just simply waiting, you know, for a fire mission. And you know how those things go. They go fire missions, and all of a sudden it's 2:00 in the morning. You call as hell in your sleeping system, and then you have to get up, you know, and run. And I was like, man, what the hell is going on? Yep. And the one thing that I didn't understand back then was that context of how was it that me reacting on a timely manner could affect the outcome of something else. You know, or not only affect something else, but understand, like you said, that it's part of a joint operating force. It wasn't just the Marine Corps, because the fires that I will be providing could not necessarily be to help Marines. It could be to help Army, special operations, like the whole 9 yards. Yeah. So I think that's a very, a very good point whenever it comes to, damn man, like as a PFC, as a Lance Corporal, you don't really know everything, but just know that your job, it's panning out to be something very big on a very bigger scale.
If there's anything that I learned over 20 years in the Marine Corps, it's that you always have room to grow and learn more. You know, I thought that then as a first lieutenant, you know, I understood what was going on. And I did to a good extent, but there was so much that I didn't understand.
Yeah.
You know, and then
Even as a lieutenant.
Even as a lieutenant, as a major years later, you know, had an even better grasp of all the things that were happening around me. But every day I would learn something new that would give me insight into how big the Department of Defense really is and how much more I had to learn.
Yeah, because you said you were admin, but then you said that you were a logistics officer.
Yep. So I became a logistics officer when I commissioned. Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's go. I like to go by referencers, right? So you were in the Marine Corps, enlisted for how many years?
By the time I commissioned, it was 7.5.
Okay, so your second enlistment, that's when you decided to actually start.
Yeah, it was near the end of my first one. I got picked up for a program called Boost. And you might be familiar with the name, you might not. It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I'm not familiar. That's why
familiar with MECEP?
Yeah, so MECEP and ECP, yeah.
Okay, so with
and PLC.
MECEP, Boost was kind of a gateway to MECEP. And what they did was put you in Newport, Rhode Island in an academic program for 9 months to get you ready to go to MECEP and to start college courses. So the idea was, well, you know, these guys and gals have not been in school for a while. Let's put them through English, math, science for 9 months, get them ready so that they can be successful once they start college. That was the plan.
What was their requisites in order for you to go to those courses?
So the reason that Boost existed was to take Marines who didn't have the best grades in high school, and that was me. Horrible high school grades. Horrible.
Okay.
So yeah, it was a good thing. It was probably something I needed, and it did set me up for success. I did very well in college, you know, my undergraduate and my master's program, and you know, I'm thankful that I had that opportunity to go there to Rhode Island for 9 months and do that.
Okay, so you went to Boost, then after that you went to MECEP.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. The difference in between MECEP and ECP is that when you do the MECEP program, you are going to college while you're active duty. Therefore, you're getting the same payments, the same entitlements, the same everything. When you do the ECP program, you already have your college degree, and now you're applying as an enlisted Marine with a college degree to just simply go to OCS to commission. Correct?
Yep, you got it.
Okay. So you essentially went to college. Which college did you go to?
Auburn.
Okay, so you went to Auburn. And then how many years did you do there?
It was about 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, give or take. So I actually started down in Jacksonville, Florida at a community college down there. And then I was dating a sailor at the time who I had met up in Newport. And as things started to get serious, I was able to transfer from Jacksonville, Florida, up to Auburn in Alabama, where she was at. And we got married soon after, had a baby, started a life together, and both graduated from Auburn and got commissioned there.
Oh, and so she became an officer as well?
In the Navy.
In the Navy, okay. Now, why did you decide to become an officer in the first place? Like, what was the motive? Was it just purely financials? Like, well, I know I'm going to do in 20, so might as well become an officer and call the shots. Or was there any other motives for you becoming an officer?
I enjoyed the Marine Corps. I didn't necessarily enjoy what I was doing in the Marine Corps, the admin part of it, but I enjoyed the Marine Corps. I liked being a Marine. I liked being around Marines.
Okay.
And I had some really good leaders early on that said, hey, you're a smart dude. And if you want this path, it's open to you. I didn't really fully understand at the time what that meant, but I felt like getting an education was a good thing. I felt like being able to stay in and maintain my rank and get paid to go get an education was a good thing.
Yeah.
And I liked the idea of the career potential.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this. Now, fast forward to today. You knowing what you know now with the experiences that you've had now, how much of a success has a degree has had in your life?
That's a good question. I never could have been commissioned without the degree.
Yeah, of course.
So, I mean, obviously I needed it. I wouldn't have been able to go to business school without not only having that undergraduate degree, but doing quite well in my undergraduate program. The business degree has helped me in my transition. You know, we'll talk about the book later, I'm sure, but after I took that time off to write the book, I was like, okay, well, I need to start the next chapter. And having that business degree paired with the experience that I had gained in my 20-year career, it really set me up to get the kind of job that I wanted to get.
Okay. Talking specifically, just simply officer or enlisted to officer.
Yep.
Do you think that a degree is necessary in order for you to be a good officer? Because you just mentioned something very important. You said, well, I couldn't have been an officer without it. But how many great enlisted people do we have that will make great officers, but for X or Y reason, they don't get selected to go to MECEP, or they don't get their degree because they're so involved in their MOS and what they do? Because with you had that motivator. It's like, yeah, man, I really don't like my job, but I love being a Marine. There's some Marines that are great at being Marines. They also love their MOS, and then they don't get the opportunity to go to MECEP.
Yeah, one of the things that I'll say about the importance of the college degree is that it taught me how to learn, if that makes sense.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
It taught me how to learn. And as an officer, I was always learning. And having to consume and analyze and then action huge amounts of information. And for me, that started in college, where you're just being force-fed information through a fire hose constantly. That's a lot what it's like being an officer, where there's just so much coming at you all the time, and you have to be able to quickly read, understand, digest, and then make something of it.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I think it's important. I hear what you're saying about all of those extremely talented people on the enlisted side that would make excellent officers, if the college degree wasn't the requirement. I think it's important, though, that it is.
You think so?
I think so. And for those who don't want to pursue the college route, that's why we have warrant officers.
Yeah. Let me share this story with you. The reason why I mentioned that is because, as you know, or as you're familiar, when did you get out? You got out recently?
21.
Okay, so you got out in
October of 2021.
Okay, so it's been almost 3 years.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah, it's been almost 3 years since you've been out. I don't know if talent management was a thing. Well, it's always been a thing, kind of, but it wasn't as spoken about as it is now, I guess. And the reason why I say that is because I actually also went to career course in 2021. It was actually December 2020, but I graduated in January 2021. Okay. And we had a meeting, a board actually. It was one major and a couple of E9s. It was like, I know for sure it was a sergeant major, and then like a master gunny, I think it was a lieutenant colonel and a major. It's as part of the panel. And they were talking about like all of these things that the Marines need to do, and if you're not doing this, you're gonna get kicked out, and blah 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 blah. Right? I've talked about it in the podcast a couple of times.
Yeah.
But I was the first one to raise my hand, and I asked the sergeant major. It's like, okay, well, what about all the Marines that are doing those things? What is the incentive? What is the incentive for them to stay? Because good Marines are gonna make good civilians, regardless if they're in the Marine Corps or not.
Yeah.
So. And he took it as like, well, if you're in this for the money reasons, you shouldn't be a Marine. And I'm like, everyone just be like, ooh, and then that's what I'm saying. Like, I think that would be a good incentive for people, for high performing Marines to also become officers. Hey, if you're top 10% for all of your ROs and all of your RSs, reporting seniors and reporting officers, for the ones that you guys don't know, then man, maybe there's something there. Maybe we should groom that Marine, maybe for his next enlistment to go, you know what I'm saying, to like waive that requirement. I'm not saying that it's not necessary or it shouldn't be necessary. I just think it should be waiverable.
It's an interesting idea. It really is. I'm sitting here trying to think about how that would work. And I feel like if there was a waiver system in place, it would be very subjective and probably not well applied. And you would have some people over here complaining like, oh, well, why didn't I get the waiver? And then other people looking at people who did get the waiver and be like, well, how did they get the waiver?
I just think there should be like a checklist. I don't think it should be something that will be overnight. I just think, like, for example, one of the checklists could be, hey, that person's part of the commandant's retention list. Hey, if the Marine was part of the commandant retention list during his first enlistment, that means that he's in the top 10% of the Marine Corps, right? Yep. So that should be checklist number one. I don't think we should pick. I think the perfect time for people to pick in this would be probably within the second to third enlistment. Mm-hmm. Their body's not all the way beat up yet, you know, so they're good there. Their body's not all the way beat up there, and then they're hungry for more. Because you got to think about it. And I don't know if you can agree with this or not, but I was so hungry my first 3 enlistments. Extremely hungry my first 3 enlistments. And then when I was about to start that 4th one, I was like, oh man, like here we go. Because it gets tiring. You know, going from one place to another and having to prove yourself, and then maybe you don't have the best leaders. And I was like, man, do I really want to keep doing this?
I totally hear you. And I've seen it so many times. I saw it so many times during my career. And I used to joke that there is no more powerful tool out there than a motivated staff sergeant.
Yeah, I know.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, the difference makers out there are the motivated staff sergeants. They're at the bottom of that totem pole of staff NCOs. They're getting licked down on a little bit, picked on a little bit, but they have the experience to get things done.
And the motivation.
I love to see it. And the motivation.
Because I met a lot of staff NCOs. Because I met a lot of staff NCOs that have the experience, but they're just like, well, I'm not going to be responsible for this. Like those motivated staff NCOs are the ones like, I don't give a shit. Like, I'll talk to the CO right now. You know, like those people. That's what I'm saying. Those are the people that we should be eyeing in order for them to get those things waived. Again, like it should be something that are checklist all throughout their career. That way, I agree with you, it could be very subjective for the command that you were actually on. Because another thing that also happened was I made the mistake when I was on recruiting that I told my leadership from the get-go, I want to become an 8412.
Okay.
So that was a mistake. Guys, if you guys are on recruiting duty or thinking of going on recruiting duty, I'm telling you this, the worst mistake that you can make is telling your leadership that you want to do something. Because I promise you that the bar is here. What they're going to do is every single time that you break that bar, they're going to put it over here and so on and so forth. You will never be good enough. I promise you. Because that's what happened to me. They told me, one of my staff NCO ICs, he told me, oh, well, until you recruit, I think he told me, I don't know, he gave me a number. I think it was like 30-something Marines in 1 year. It was like, until you recruit this, you're not good enough to become an 8412. Broke the record, won Recruiter of the Year for the 6th Marine Corps District. What now?
Yeah, and now the finish line moved.
Yeah, the finish line moved. So that's what I'm saying. It will be the same thing for officers. I feel it's like, oh, I'm joining because I want to be an officer. Okay. Yeah, by the way, you're not good enough. I think it should be like checklists within different commands. That way it's not as subjective. That way the package needs to go up. Oh, shoot. The package needs to go up regardless of what maybe one commander feels about you. You know? So transitioning a little bit. So how was that experience for you putting in that package to become an officer?
You know, putting in the package was pretty easy. And this is again where it actually helped being an admin.
Yeah.
Right? Because I was used to looking at things like this.
Okay.
I had reviewed packages for various different programs and processes. So I knew what they were supposed to look like. I knew where to go and find the information. I put it all together by myself. I required very little, if any, assistance. What was a little more challenging was the interview process. Because you had to interview at that time. And one of them was a board interview. So I was sitting there being boarded by a couple captains, a couple majors. And that's a little bit intimidating. You know, they kind of start firing questions.
As a sergeant, right? You were a sergeant or a staff sergeant?
I was a sergeant at the time.
A sergeant?
Yeah. Yeah, so a little bit intimidating, but I guess I had the right answers, or at least enough of them to win their confidence. And they endorsed the package, and then I had to go sit down with the squadron CO and then the group CO as well.
Oh, wow.
And talk with them one-on-one.
So Lieutenant Colonel and Colonel?
Lieutenant Colonel and Colonel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, man. One-on-one.
One-on-one. Yep.
How'd that conversation go?
I think it went well. I walked out of there with the signature I needed.
Okay,
so
yeah, good.
well.
Yeah, it had to go good, right? He's here today.
I knew both of them pretty well at that point.
Okay.
You know, it wasn't like I was just some guy off the street. But yeah, that was, you know, in some ways a big achievement, and in other ways just the beginning.
You have the experience of doing both, doing Marine Corps recruit training and doing OCS, Officer Candidate School. Which one is harder? And I don't want the political answer. I don't want the political answer.
I'm not going to give you the political answer.
Okay.
I'll give you the straight up.
Okay.
For me, boot camp was harder.
Okay.
But boot camp was harder because I was younger and I didn't understand the games. Right? You go to boot camp and there are so many different games being played. All right. We know something called 2 sheets in a pillowcase, right?
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I knew by the time I went to OCS was that we weren't playing this game 2 sheets in a pillowcase where you constantly had to rip the sheets off of the bed and then put them back on and remake the bed. We weren't playing that game because the drill instructor was mad or because so-and-so had screwed up. We were playing the game because we were 10 minutes ahead of schedule and the drill instructor needed to kill time, right? That's why that game was being played. So it didn't matter how fast you moved. It doesn't matter how slowly that person over there moved. The game was going to go on until the white space had been filled and it was time to go to chow.
Yeah, and you understood that?
I understood that when I went to OCS.
Oh, gotcha.
Right? Because by then I was a staff sergeant and I had seen all of this. I had done all of this. So I knew how the game was played. But as a recruit, when you're 18 years old, you don't know what's going on.
No.
But you're getting angry because somebody keeps screwing up. And you have to do it over again.
Dude, I was crying. I'm not going to lie. I cried when I went to boot camp because the part that frustrated me the most was getting dressed and undressed over and over again.
Right.
That was the part that really pissed me off the most. I was like, I was so frustrated at that.
They do that. They do that to break you down. They do that because it's hard. But sometimes they also do it just to fill 8 minutes of white space.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. That's literally what it is. You know?
OCS is harder physically. It's much more demanding. All of the requirements are harder. You run farther. You have to do it faster. You carry more gear. It's more demanding in that sense. So harder in one way, but easier because you know that it's a game and you know how it's played and you just keep your head down and you get through it.
One thing that I keep hearing though is that the Marines that are Mustangs, even though they have more knowledge, sometimes they don't do as good in OCS because they're already pre-wired for what the Marine Corps is. And essentially, you have a lens of looking at the Marine Corps as in like, okay, well, this is the Marine Corps as an enlisted Marine. How hard was it for you to let that hard wiring go of what it meant to be a Marine and learning all over again what it meant to be a Marine Corps officer?
So I think those are two different things. I did see prior enlisted guys who struggled in OCS. And usually it was because they weren't taking it seriously enough, because they thought they knew everything. Just because you know how the game is played and you know that there is a game being played doesn't mean that you don't have to be a participant in that game. You still have to sound off. You still have to run. You still have to do what the sergeant instructor asks you to do and do it quickly. The guys that struggled were the ones who thought they were too good to play the game.
Well, okay. So, in what ranks usually were those people?
Sergeant, staff sergeant, and gunny. There's like 1 or 2 master sergeants I know, and they struggled. Usually, it was the gunnies who struggled most, though, because they were so
I can see myself struggling through that.
Yeah,
shit.
I mean, they were like 12 years in service.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
13, 14 maybe. So yeah, I mean, they felt like they were due a certain amount of respect, and outside of that environment, they were due that respect. But it was hard for them to just accept the reality that they're a candidate like everybody else, and you need to put out.
Yeah, because you got to look at it. I mean, the way that I would look at it as a gunny is like, man, this drill instructor, he's a freaking staff sergeant, and I'm over here a gunny, seasoned gunny already,
right?
And this motherfucker's yelling at me. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
And I get the whole game and all that stuff, but what about the? I hear the responses that I've had to officers that are Mustang is, it was that boot camp was physically harder, but OCS was mentally harder because like now you have to ride.
That's true.
The
academics are more challenging.
Yeah,
for sure.
But I'm sure that it helped you that you were already admin, so you already had all that experience.
It did, yeah. But back to your other part of the question there about making the transition once you go through OCS, TBS, your MOS school, and you're out in the fleet as a lieutenant. I think that's hard for a lot of Mustangs. I struggled with that a little bit.
Really?
Because I think everybody has the tendency to gravitate toward what they know and their strong suits. And that's all well and good in most cases. But when you're suddenly a platoon commander and you're gravitating toward what you know, and that's the role of your platoon sergeant, then you're stepping on toes, right? Let me ask you this. Finish this sentence for me. The backbone of the Marine Corps is?
The sergeants.
Okay.
Or NCOs.
What if I ask you the same question? The backbone of the Marine Corps is?
Say the NCOs.
Okay. You could ask a group of Marines that question, and every Marine might have a slightly different answer. Oh, it's the Lance Corporals. Oh, it's the captains. Everybody sees it a little bit differently. By the time I was done with my 20 years and ready to retire, if you asked me that question, I would say the backbone of the Marine Corps is the officer staff NCO relationship.
Interesting. Can you elaborate on that?
I think if you look at a nuclear household where you have mom, dad, and kids, it's a lot like that. And I'm not going to assign a gender or anything like that to a staff NCO or an officer, but it is a partnership, and it takes both to make for a good unit. Whether you're working in a section within a headquarters or you're working in a platoon, a company, whatever, that staff NCO officer relationship is important for setting the example for the Marines and making sure that everything is carried out in the way that it should be. Both of them need to be setting that stellar example for the Marines, and if one of them is not pulling his or her weight, it makes a huge impact.
100%. And I agree with you 100%. I thought you were actually going to say that it was the majors. Because that is the reality. If you look at it, it is the majors.
There's
The
major
XOs, OPSOs, they're the ones that really get blamed behind the scenes of their lieutenants and their staff NCOs not performing, and that's the facts. That's the facts. And they get whipped so bad, and they cannot talk to anybody because they're in that lone spot. They cannot to the captains. They cannot talk to the captains, and they cannot talk to the lieutenant colonels. You know what I'm saying? Like
that's true. Yeah.
They have to stand there and just simply freaking take it. That was brutal. Working at the battalion, I saw that. Like, the majors, how bad they really got it from.
Majors don't have a lot of fun.
Yeah, they don't have a lot of funds, but they are in my opinion, they are what the sergeant is to the enlisted or the gunny. I would say what the gunny is to the enlisted, the major is to the officers. You brought in a very good point about the staff NCO and officer relationship. What do you recommend to officers to foster that caring nature, to develop that relationship with their staff NCOs?
For any brand new lieutenant, whether you have enlisted experience or not, I think it starts with understanding the roles and responsibilities associated with your billet, and then understanding the responsibilities associated with that staff NCO's billet, and then finding where the two meet and making sure that each of you has the same idea about where your responsibilities start and end. And maybe there needs to be a slight bit of overlap, but not a tremendous amount, right? And that was my problem initially, was I would start bleeding into my staff sergeant's realm of responsibility, and he was great. He said, "Hey, sir, let's talk." And we sat down and we had a conversation. And he told me his perspective. And I said, "Wow, you're right. That's not my responsibility. I should be over here doing this instead." Yeah. And you know what? It's actually great that you're here doing this because I know that it's being taken care of and I can go focus on other things. And that was the start of a beautiful relationship.
Wow. And that is, do you know the staff sergeant's name?
I do.
Is he still in the Marine Corps?
He is, yeah.
What's his name now?
Now Sergeant Major.
Sergeant Major who?
Nichols.
Sergeant Major Nichols. Hey, that's what I'm talking about. That's what the fuck I'm talking about. So shout out to Sergeant Major Nichols.
Yeah, one of the best leaders that I ever worked with in my 20 years.
Hell yeah. So now, that is the greatest story. Person still in the Marine Corps. But what about that shitty staff NCO that, like you said, is not pulling his weight? How do you recommend for officers to...
That's a little more challenging.
Yeah, how do you but how do you recommend to essentially pull that person to the side and be like, "Hey man, like," because a lot of people would just say, "Well, his fit rep will reflect," but the problem when you do that is his fit rep's written once or twice a year.
Yeah.
it's not written, every day. And the ones that get affected by that shitty ass is yourself, obviously, because you're essentially responsible. But also, more importantly, the Marines are under his charge.
For those officers who are prior enlisted or just have a little bit more leadership experience, sometimes the one-on-one helps. Okay. And you can help that staff NCO find his or her way. That's not always going to work, but for the ones who have a little more experience, it could. In other cases, that's where you need senior staff NCOs to be aware of the problem and help address the problem. For some junior staff NCOs, it's just an issue of lack of experience, lack of training, and they just need a little more help as they continue on their path of growth in the Marine Corps. Yeah,
because they don't get blamed for shit anyways. They're gonna get blamed.
They will.
The staff NCO, like totally. The blame lands on the staff sergeant, regardless. So, but let me see if I'm understanding you correctly. What you're saying is, you as an officer, you also want to ensure that the senior enlisted leadership is also aware of the problem, so that way they can attack it that way.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, but what about all those lieutenants that only have that either one gunny or one staff sergeant? Staff sergeant's been passed twice. Because here's the thing. There's a social media influencer. His name is Master Sergeant Stanek. I don't know if you know who he is. His name is Pogue Actual. 1169. Yeah, so I don't know if you know who he is, but he says two very important things. For every one bad leader, I can show you 4 good leaders in the Marine Corps.
I believe it.
And the other thing that he says is that there's more good leaders in the Marine Corps than what there are bad leaders. But the problem is that those bad leaders are like rotten fruit.
Yep.
And then we have Marines that get out because of that one bad experience that they have with one bad leader. But you got to think about it. If you have a bad leader, you have to endure that motherfucker for 3 or 4 years. You see what I'm saying? Like, or at least until he PCSs. So that's the problem that I'm having. And essentially what I want people to know is, like, how do you deal, or how did you, I'm pretty sure you dealt with those.
I had a few.
Okay, so how do you deal with them, and how would you recommend, now that you have those experiences, for those young officers to deal with those staff sergeants that's like, man, I'm just riding my time out to retirement?
I think awareness is the best thing that you can do. So bringing in the senior enlisted to be part of that conversation and to help them try to shape the behavior of that staff NCO who's struggling a little bit. It's sometimes you just have to fire people, and firing people in the Marine Corps isn't easy. You have to go up the chain with it, and it has to be agreed upon, and then there has to be somewhere to put that person and somebody to backfill them. But sometimes we get to that point. Some Marines, no matter how much attention you pay them, no matter how much incentive you give them, just aren't going to turn that corner. And
now,
that's hard sometimes.
I know what this looks like, but just for reference, for other people that are going to be watching this podcast, how does firing somebody in the Marine Corps look like?
It can look a number of different ways.
Okay.
Sometimes they're just put into a billet that is more collateral than anything else, and their primary billet is performed by somebody else. That's the way it goes a lot of times.
So SACO?
That's one of them. Yeah.
So SACO, what would be some billets that you would say would be considered, hey man, that person's there because he's fired?
It varies. It varies. And yeah, it can look different from place to place, from situation to situation.
Very true.
I wouldn't want to say any right now and then have somebody be like, oh, well, I'm holding that billet. Was I fired and I didn't even know it?
Yeah.
No, a lot of times people get those collateral duties because they're good too.
Yeah.
The better you are, the more bricks are going to end up in your pack.
Yep. That is very
collateral true. After collateral after collateral. And I'll admit it. I did that to some of my best Marines sometimes because I didn't have anybody else that could shoulder that weight. So I gave them more and more and more. But more times than not, they succeeded.
Yeah, and I think you bring in a good point, right? Because we're talking about, firing somebody and all that stuff, but sometimes that's the easy way for sections to get out of stuff. It's like, oh, well, we have this billet that needs to be filled. We have this quota that needs to be filled. Who are we sending? And then all of a sudden, we're sending, Lance Corporal Alvarez. Alvarez, if you're out there, you got duty next week. But so we're sending Lance Corporal Alvarez or Lance Corporal freaking Jones to be the assistant SACO or to be the SACO or to be something. When in reality, we should be sending the best Marines because those Marines represent your leadership. They represent you. They represent your section.
Yeah.
So, but that's hard because you also know that now your section might slack off a little bit because you're sending your best Marine away.
You brought this up earlier, how deployments over the years went from full unit deployments to just sending out augments.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely true. And that was one of the things that I had to deal with a lot in my latter years as an officer was filling those billets. And yeah, there were times where it would have been easy to give that opportunity to somebody who wasn't pulling his or her weight and say, okay, well, we get rid of that problem. That was never my mentality. I wanted to give those opportunities to the Marines who deserved it, who wanted it and deserved it.
Yeah, and one thing that I saw also, because here's the problem in my unit that I had, right? It was that those billets was only given. I won't say all billets. I would say the vast majority of billets were given to the people that were either one in trouble or nobody wanted to deal with. So that created the atmosphere that if you worked there, it was bad. So now Marines were pre-wired to, if you're going to work here at the battalion, is because that's a big no. You don't want to work there. And then now when I got there and I try to foster a different type of atmosphere, it was like, no, man, working here is great. You have this opportunity, you have this opportunity, you have this opportunity. Marines were like, I ain't buying that shit.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I ain't buying that. I ain't buying that.
They've been burned before.
Because they not only they've been burned before, but they see their predecessors. And then they're like, yeah, man, I don't want to go over that predecessor. I don't want to go over that guy, Okay, so moving on to a different subject. Now you've been in the Marine Corps for a while. You are an officer. What was your favorite duty station?
It's tough. Probably Hawaii.
Why is that?
Because it's beautiful.
Well, yeah, I mean, in Hawaii, I've never been stationed in Hawaii. So for the ones that have been stationed in Hawaii, let me know. But there's not much going on in Hawaii, is there? Like, whenever it comes operationally.
So I was artillery at that time.
Oh, okay.
And
well, that's the best place to be stationed artillery because they only go to the field like once a month. Once a year.
You have to go to the Big Island.
That's what I'm saying.
We were doing it quarterly. For the most part, quarterly.
Quarterly?
Yeah. So going over to the Big Island, driving up the hill to PTA, and having either battery or battalion fire X's up there. It was good training. But for me, I think that might have been my favorite duty station because as an officer, the longer you're in, the farther you get away from the Marines. And as a lieutenant, that's the closest you're ever going to be to the Marines. You get to lead them, you get to mentor them, you get to train them. And I did a tremendous amount of that during my first 3 or 4 years as an officer when I was with 112 in Hawaii. And I had a great time doing it. But then you put on a little rank, you have more responsibility, but that responsibility isn't the same. You're not there teaching, coaching, and mentoring those Marines anymore. You're doing that to some extent, but your job has a different focus. And for me, as that began to happen, it became less fun.
Got you. We're going to continue to talk about this in the part 2. The reason for it is because I want to take a deep dive into your officer experience. And then after that, I want to know, if your Marine Corps career or your 20 years over the service inspired you into writing the novel that you wrote, Meet at the Seams.
Where the seams meet.
Where the seams meet, okay? So I really want to talk about that. Let's do a part 2, guys. As you guys always know, make sure you guys check out any of these videos are right here, which will bring extreme value into your life and into your career. Make sure that you subscribe if you haven't done so already. Go to TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Go ahead and find me. Find the link in my bio and make sure that you guys schedule a phone consultation with me because I promise you that I will bring a lot of value into your life. Patrick, where can people find you at?
So on Instagram, Forever Giant 2014. I have an author website. It's authorpatrickholcomb.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find. If you want to talk about anything work-related, transition-related, Marine Corps-related, that's the best place to get me.
Awesome. Guys, I'll see you in part 2. Have a good one.